Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would finally give my little fight prediction and my fight breakdown of the big fight that is going to be happening next weekend between that of Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez and Mr. Jermell Charlo. And this is a very big fight for a multitude of reasons. Not only has Canelo Alvarez, not only have many people really begged for him to fight both of the Charlo brothers for a very long time, but it really couldn't come at a better moment because Jermell Charlo is pretty much at the best point of his career. Of course, he is, going to be smaller than that of Canelo Alvarez in terms of the weight. But that being said, let me also state this. I don't think that the size difference is going to be as significant as what many people are going to try and claim that it is. Jermell Charlo is a guy that walks around at, I believe, anywhere from 180 to 190. Canelo Alvarez is also a guy that walks around anywhere from 185 to 195. Both of these guys are similar when you actually talk about probably with what they rehydrate to. But of course, because Canelo Alvarez, he has fought at higher weight classes, he is going to be more accustomed to that of fighting bigger fighters. Jermell Charlo has never fought a fighter that, in my view, has really been that much bigger than that of a 154 pounder. Now, Tony Harrison, for example, maybe one could say that, he maybe has a little bit of a build of a middleweight, but Tony Harrison is also a very flawed fighter. And on top of that, I'm not really sure if he has the type of power nor the type of boxing ability for me to really call him a legitimate middleweight. But, it is what it is. Anyways, this is going to be a very interesting fight. I thought that I would give my breakdown. And with this breakdown, we're going to review a video by that and Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation. And I kind of thought that I would talk about some of the factors, in my view, that would be going into this fight. And this is, at the current moment in time, going to be the most important fight of both of their careers. Because Jermell Charlo, of course, this is either going to make or break him. And kind of the same thing with Canelo Alvarez. It's also going to make or break him. And Canelo Alvarez is going to want to win this fight because if he does not win this fight, especially a certain amount of the people that tried to revise history, you're going to have a certain amount of the people say, see, this is what we've been talking about the whole entire time. That the reason why Canelo Alvarez didn't want to face the Charlo brothers was, because he was avoiding them and that he was always a limited boxer all this time. The thing is about Canelo Alvarez, at least when it comes to that of the LDBC and new media, this is pretty much a lose-lose situation for him because he's not really going to get credit whether he loses or whether he wins. It doesn't really matter because if he ends up losing this fight, all they're going to say is that, see, Canelo Alvarez, he can't be one of the all-time greats because every single time he's been in a big fight against a potential pound-for-pound fighter, it's been controversial or he didn't win or blah, 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 all this other stuff. When it comes down to it. And if he wins, they'll say, well, yeah, sure, he won, but he was 3 weight classes bigger or something like that. When really that's not actually the case. Canelo Alvarez, once again, he's probably around a natural middleweight fighter. Now, he can't make middleweight anymore because once fighters start to go up in terms of that weight and get comfortable there, they don't feel like cutting all that weight again, not eating as much as what they once did. When they get up in age, especially within, that mid-30 range, it's harder to get down and cut on the weight. So a lot of the times they'll just kind of stick to that weight class and they get more comfortable and they get more accustomed there. But Canelo Alvarez, when you take a look at him compared to the other fighters there, like Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, John Ryder, or fighters that could fit there like Danny Jacobs, Demetrius Andrade, Jermell Charlo, David Benavidez, he's not as big as any of those guys. Canelo Alvarez, truth be told, when he was fighting that at Gennady Golovkin, he was not even the same size as Gennady Golovkin. So Canelo Alvarez, once again, I don't think a lot of people understand that Canelo Alvarez is probably around a natural middleweight stature. Same with Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo is also around a middleweight stature. That's why in terms of the size difference, it's really not going to be as much of an excuse as many people are going to try to claim it to be. But we all know that the LDBC and new media, that they're going to frame this in whatever way to make Canelo Alvarez look bad because, of course, they don't like Canelo. And they know that he's still a main threat. But anyways, Dante's Boxing Nation is going to talk about it. I was going to release a video that I reviewed by that at Boxing Eagle, but it was 40 minutes long. And I didn't really want to put a video that was that long out there. And a lot of the video really was something about a statement that Virgil Hunter said. So a lot of it probably wasn't even about the breakdown. So I thought that I would just kind of do this one, be a little bit more clear and apparent. But anyways, let's get into this. Let's see overall what Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation has to say. Let's get straight into it.
Yeah, yeah, Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So we are only about a week away from this fight, undisputed versus undisputed. Canelo versus the junior middleweight champion of the world, Charlo, Jermell Charlo, that is. A lot of people are making their predictions, but Freddie Roach, he made a pretty bold prediction. Freddie believes the power of Jermell Charlo will be too much for Canelo Alvarez, particularly the left hook. Freddie Roach, he said about Jermell, he's mean and defiant, and better yet, he backs that attitude up with his talent.
I'm seeing a certain amount of people that are kind of making bold predictions about Canelo Alvarez being knocked out by that of Jermell Charlo. And I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. Anything is possible in boxing, especially a sport to where it just takes one shot to knock someone out. And Canelo, of course, he is not the same fighter that he once was. And Canelo, of course, he's about 33 years old. But when you talk about all the wear and tear on his body and how long he's been fighting, Canelo Alvarez has been fighting now professionally really for about 20 years. So, Canelo Alvarez, yeah, he might be 33 years old, but he's really about 36 years old, if not even 37 years old, just because of the wear and tear on his body. Now, he still has a little bit of time left, but it's not going to be that much more time. So Canelo Alvarez, if he's going to win some of the bigger fights in his career, like against that of the Charlo brothers or Demetrius Andrade or David Benavidez, he has to do that right now because he's not going to have much time left. He has about probably maybe 2, maybe 3 years at max. And to be honest with you, that might be a little bit generous. And there's no guarantee that he ends up winning this fight. But the thing that's interesting to me is that a lot of people believe that Jermell Charlo is going to stop that at Canelo Alvarez. I think that a lot of people are going with bold predictions. Do I believe that Jermell Charlo is going to knock out Canelo Alvarez? No, not personally. Once again, you never know what's going to happen. There were 2 fights this year that ended up going completely haywire in terms of the expectations, that of Inoue and that of Stephon Fulton and that of Crawford versus Spence. But I think that just with the type of style and the type of fighter that Jermell Charlo is, I don't think that he's going to be quite the threat as once upon a time what a Golovkin or Danny Jacobs was, or some of the other fighters even of that caliber. Now, of course, that was a prime Canelo Alvarez. This is not a prime Canelo Alvarez. This is a Canelo Alvarez that is kind of on his last legs and only has a few more fights, big fights probably left within him, but we'll see what happens. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be very interesting to see if Jermell's, if his power can kind of carry up. Do I think that he'll hurt Canelo Alvarez as badly as what Canelo will hurt him? More than likely not. And the reason why I say that is because Jermell, even though he has very, very good power, I don't think that he's ever been in the ring with someone that can hit like that of a Canelo Alvarez. And on top of that, someone that has that level of defense, counter-punching ability, and that level of boxing IQ. And a lot of fighters believe that they're just going to get in the ring and kind of bully Canelo Alvarez with their level of power. And then they get in the ring and they not only realize that, he's very slick and that, he's a very smart fighter, but that he has great power in return, and that he has great body work, and that, on top of that, he has probably one of the greater chins in boxing history. I don't even think Canelo Alvarez has ever been knocked down before. Canelo Alvarez is probably, when you talk about chin, you can have a legitimate debate that he has the greatest chin in boxing history. Now, once again, once you get a little bit older and once you've been through all that wear and tear, there could be a little bit of resistance. So, we'll see. Or there could be a little bit of, of a chink in that armor. So we'll see what happens.
Not be intimidated. He has a great chin, and he doesn't get fazed by getting hit. Charlo is downright vicious inside the ring. I think Charlo will have too much firepower for Canelo to handle, especially at the higher weight. Canelo needs to stay away from Charlo's left hook. The question is, can Canelo stay away from...
I do agree that Canelo will have to stay away from Jermell Charlo's left hook, and I said that in my other video that I'm not going to release. Jermell Charlo does have a wicked left hook. He has a great left hook. He also has a good right cross and a pretty decent jab. I think it's a little bit overrated, but he does have a pretty good jab when it comes down to it. Canelo will have to watch out for those weapons. Now, as for Jermell Charlo, if you're Jermell Charlo, you're going to want to watch out for that good right that Canelo's going to try to throw to your arms, into your head early on. You're going to have to watch out for that left hook to the body and that left hook upstairs. You're going to have to really watch out for that body work. If you're Jermell Charlo in this fight, in my view, you're going to have to show Canelo Alvarez that he is not able to bully you. You're going to have to try and do it like, I'm not going to say Evander Holyfield, but, when Canelo tries to back you up, you can't just, stay up against the ropes, because if you do that, you're going to really feel that power. And it's possible that Canelo might be able to tear him to shreds if there's even still a good enough left version of Canelo left, which I do predict that there more than likely is going to be. But we'll see what happens. As to that of Jermell Charlo, he also is going to have to use his feet here. If Canelo Alvarez tries to back him up into a corner, you cannot be afraid to try and muscle Canelo Alvarez or overall try and clinch with him and frustrate him. Certain fighters that get in the ring with Canelo Alvarez and they feel that level of power and they start backtracking, they get a little bit afraid because they didn't expect him to have that level of pop in his punches. And like I said, I promise you, if Jermell Charlo thought that Tony Harrison or Brian Castano was a powerful puncher, he hasn't felt anything yet like that of Canelo Alvarez. Canelo Alvarez punches like a light heavyweight, at least when you talk about some of these guys that have been in the ring with him. Dimitri Bivol, when it came down to it, Dimitri Bivol said that when he got in the ring with Canelo Alvarez, that he was the hardest hitter that he ever fought. And that's a guy that, was in the ring with Gilberto Zeta Ramirez, with Joe Smith Jr., and a certain amount of other guys. He said that Canelo Alvarez was the hardest hitter that he ever fought. I believe that's what he said. He also had Gennady Golovkin and Danny Jacobs backtracking at times. Two guys that both have one-shot knockout power. Canelo Alvarez's power is nothing to mess around with. And on top of that, he does have great counter-punching ability. He does have great defense. So if you're Jermell Charlo, you got to try to work with that jab. You got to try, to double, sometimes triple it up. Use that right cross. Try to set it up with the left hook. If you're Canelo Alvarez, watch out for that incoming left hook, because Jermell Charlo is going to be watching for an incoming counter. He's going to try to block, and then he's going to try to hit you with a good left hook counter right away. That being said, Canelo Alvarez, he also is going to try to hit Jermell Charlo with some of those counters. And Canelo more than likely is going to try to get Jermell Charlo up against the ropes, and he's more than likely going to try and bruise him. He's more than likely going to try and tear him to pieces up against the ropes. Will he be successful? We'll see what happens. But, when it comes down to it, I do predict that Canelo more than likely is going to be successful up against the ropes, and Jermell Charlo is going to have to react to that. There's going to be certain times where he's going to have to exchange or fight his way out of there, or where he's just going to have to occupy the vacated space or use his feet. And that's going to be interesting because Jermell Charlo has never been great, in my view, with head movement. He's also, he's done well, somewhat with distance, some of the fighters at 154, but I don't think he's ever close to fight a fighter on the caliber of Canelo Alvarez. But we'll see.
Charlo's left hook. I don't think he can, which is why I'm picking Charlo by stoppage. That's a very interesting prediction, especially coming from Freddie Roach. There is no doubt about it. Jermell Charlo's left hook is his most dangerous weapon. He can land that punch going forward. He can land that punch moving backwards, side to side. And whenever he lands it, it's extremely effective. Another major attribute that Charlo has is his stamina. He actually gets stronger almost in the later rounds. He's got a lot of his knockouts in the championship rounds. This is usually when Canelo...
That's going to be very interesting because Canelo Alvarez, especially within the past year, his stamina has looked awful. and I took a look at that last fight against that of John Ryder, and I decided to rewatch the highlights. And I said, let me watch it just to see if maybe I misjudged it. Maybe Canelo Alvarez, maybe he looked a little bit better than what I thought. Maybe John Ryder was just a bit tougher than what I thought. Maybe it was the hand surgery. Maybe he was just, not expecting John Ryder to be as tough of a cookie as what he was. And in the first 5 rounds, Canelo Alvarez looked phenomenal. But in the rest of the rounds, Canelo looked very sluggish. He looked very slow. He looked very lethargic. He just looked like he had no stamina whatsoever. And Canelo's never been A+ in terms of his stamina. But pretty much the post-Mayweather era, once he got past that Mayweather fight, of course he lost, but, once he survived the Mayweather fight to later on, eventually still become a great champion, Canelo Alvarez, you could tell that he still had some stamina issues, but that at least he was able to conserve his energy and really pace himself very well. Like, he could last at least the majority of the rounds. He might take a couple rounds off, but he could last the majority of the rounds. Like, against Danny Jacobs and Caleb Plant and all those guys, he'd lose a few rounds maybe, but he was still able to find a way to win. And he was able to find a way to win against John Ryder and some of those guys, but I don't think that John Ryder, of course, is an elite contender. Now, Jermell Charlo, because I also don't think that he's an elite fighter, it's very possible that this fight could be easier than that of the John Ryder fight, because, John Ryder is a big guy. He's bigger than Canelo in terms of girth and in terms of thickness. He's a natural super middleweight fighter. Canelo Alvarez is not. And on top of that, he was not afraid to bruise with Canelo Alvarez, especially in the second half of that fight. So, it's going to be very interesting because Jermell Charlo, in my view, more than likely, what he's going to be trying to do in this fight is that he more than likely is going to play the distance game. He's more than likely going to try and outrange that of Canelo Alvarez. So we'll see what happens.
Alvarez is getting tired, especially if he's fighting against someone who's really forcing him to punch more, throw more punches. That's what Bivol did. We don't know if Charlo is going to be able to do that.
Well, Canelo Alvarez had no stamina after round 4. He had nothing. And that's why I say, I don't know if Canelo Alvarez was just aged in that fight or that, he just gained way too much muscle mass. And once again, I'm not a person that gives excuses for fighters. I think that a lot of the times that when someone says, oh, that fighter looked different, than what they usually do, I oftentimes think that that's an excuse. Like when people say that Lomachenko looked different, in the Devin Haney fight or in the Lopez fight, I'm not really sure if he did, or if he did, it was probably because of the game plan of the other fighter. Or when Spence looked, quote unquote, different against Crawford. Now, there is certain cases where a fighter does look different, and you can tell that something appears to be off, or maybe they're aging, or maybe they gained a little bit too much weight. Canelo certainly looked off to me in the Dimitri Bivol fight because in the first 4 rounds, I thought that he was very competitive, and I thought that he won pretty much the first 3 or 4 rounds. But every round after round 4, he was awful. He had no stamina whatsoever. He was backtracking. He couldn't even throw a single punch. He was still defending very decently well, but, he was pretty much running on fumes. He had no gas in that tank whatsoever.
We also don't know if Charlo's stamina is going to be the same now that he's putting on so much weight. Now, when it comes to Canelo Alvarez, his best weapon is his natural size over Jermell Charlo. It doesn't matter how much weight Jermell...
Well, it's going to be one of his weapons, but of course Dante is going to try and frame this, and this is why I say that this is a lose-lose situation for Canelo Alvarez, whether he wins or loses this fight, for that of the LDBC and new media. I think that it's a great fight for his legacy, and Canelo is going to have to win this fight, because a lot of the revisionists, guys, especially with the LDBC and new media, they're of course going to rake Canelo Alvarez over the coals if he loses this fight. So once again, this is very important for Canelo Alvarez's career, just as much as it is for Jermell Charlo. And this fight is going to make or break both of their careers, because for Canelo, it means that he still maybe has a little bit more of time on that mountaintop. If he loses this fight, he is completely done. He is completely kicked off, because he will never beat an elite fighter ever again if he loses to Jermell Charlo. Because there's no way that the best version of Canelo Alvarez should ever lose to a fighter like Jermell Charlo. And that's not me saying that Jermell Charlo is a bad fighter. He's a very good fighter. But if you take a look at some of his fights, especially against that Brian Gastano and what was his name, Tony Harrison, he's a very, very flawed fighter. He does not have great head movement. He can be a little bit too repetitive at times when it comes down to it. He establishes distance somewhat well, but he's not the best at it, especially when it comes to a fighter that can kind of box like that of Castano or that of a Tony Harrison. So once again, if he loses this fight, that'll tell me that his career is basically over. Because if he loses to Jermell Charlo, he's not beating Jermell Charlo. He's not beating David Benavidez. He's not beating Andre. He's not beating any of those guys. If he can't even beat, Jermell Charlo, hell, he might not even get past Janabek.
Charlo gains. He's still a...
And as for Jermell Charlo, of course, if he loses this fight, it's pretty much over for him, because where does he really go from there when it comes down to it? Of course, he said that, he might potentially stay there, but I don't see Jermell Charlo beating the winner of David Benavidez and Demetrius Andre, just my personal view. Maybe if it's Andre, maybe, but not David Benavidez. I doubt he's going to go back down all the way to 154. That's just my personal view of it, but we'll see. Like I said, Jermell Charlo, in my view, the reason why he's doing this is not only for a payday, but because he realizes that, at that 154-pound weight class, he's pretty much screwed, because he doesn't want that Terrence Bud Crawford ass whooping. That's just my personal view of it.
Junior middleweight, and he's still going to...
And if he does go back down to 154, at least he can say, well, I just beat Canelo Alvarez, so basically all my bullets were out of the gun, before I fought Terrence Bud Crawford. I wasn't the same. I was wore down. Because fighters will make that excuse.
Getting hit by a natural super middleweight that has really good power.
Well, no, Canelo Alvarez is not a natural super middleweight. But just to talk about Canelo Alvarez and his biggest weapon, it might be his defense. His defense is still relatively good, but it will decrease in the second half of the fight because he doesn't have great stamina anymore. And he's never had great stamina, but at least at his best, it was good within the past several years. It's not even good anymore in the second half of the fight. It's possible that he doesn't have any stamina at all.
Get me wrong. Freddie Roach, he might be right. Jermell Charlo may go in there and have even more power or just as much power as Canelo does. And if he does, Canelo is definitely in trouble. It's also very possible that it may take Jermell Charlo or Jermell Charlo 5 punches to do the damage that Canelo Alvarez 1 punch would do, once again, because of the weight disadvantage. To me, the weight jump is the only...
It's not really the weight disadvantage to me, although once again, yes, Canelo is going to have the size advantage, but not as big as what many people say that it's going to be. It's really more of a one-weight class advantage, really, even if that. But when it comes down to it, Canelo just has natural power. Canelo's always had great power, but some fighters, even when they move up the weight classes, it seems to translate pretty good. Canelo was one of those fighters.
Thing that makes this fight competitive. If it wasn't for the weight jump, if these guys were fighting naturally in the same weight class, I think this would be an easy win for Jermell Charlo.
Well, no, it wouldn't be, but Dante has to pretty much make that claim because that's already his excuse, setting into this fight, when it comes down to it. But once again, this is a lose-lose situation for Canelo, whether he wins or loses to that of Jermell Charlo, so at least for the LDBC. In my view, it's a great fight.
It's far more competitive, especially when it comes to making a prediction on the fight. We'll see how it plays out in about a week. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.
But anyways, that's pretty much about it for what Dante has to say. I'll pretty much finish up my thoughts here. In my view, who do I have winning the fight? I do have Mr. Saul Canelo Alvarez winning the fight by that of unanimous decision, or by that maybe of possible later on stoppage. If this were a Canelo Alvarez from about 3 years ago who was fighting Saunders and Plant and had just defeated Danny Jacobs, that type of Canelo Alvarez, I would probably have predicted him to knock out Jermell Charlo within about 6 to 8 rounds, because I don't think Jermell Charlo has the movement. I don't think that he has the boxing IQ. I don't think that he has, the ranging of fighting. Just in my personal view, I think that he's a very good fighter. It's a borderline great fighter. I don't think that he's an all-time great level fighter. But of course, if Jermell Charlo is able to win this fight, even if Canelo Alvarez is probably not quite the same version of himself, it still will be a great win, because even Canelo at this point in time, he's still a very dangerous fighter. He's not, that same Tiger that he once was. Right now, the Tiger, he probably has a hurt leg, and, right now, it's almost like that of a lion that you see on that of the Discovery Channel. Where a bunch of hyenas are starting to surround it. Right now, Canelo Alvarez, he's getting surrounded by a bunch of hyenas. He's still, the dangerous lion, but, they're starting to sense weakness, and eventually, if the lion is not able to get up, or if he is not able to defend himself, he will eventually fall. He will eventually die. So once again, it's going to be very interesting. Right now, Canelo, he's not quite the, same king of the pride as he once was. But still, he's very dangerous. You still have to watch out for that injured lion. So once again, it's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening here. But anyways, that's pretty much about it. I have Canelo Alvarez winning. I personally believe that not only his power, but his size and his skill set and his defense will more than likely win the day. I'm going to predict more than likely that Canelo wins this fight 8 rounds to 4. Now, would I be surprised if Jermell Charlo ended up winning this fight, say 8 rounds to 4 or 7 rounds to 5, just because Canelo doesn't quite look like the same fighter? I wouldn't be shocked. Maybe slightly surprised, but once again, you never know in that of the boxing game. We'll see what happens. And there has been questions about Canelo Alvarez and how much motivation he still has for that of the sport of boxing. Now, Canelo himself has said that he plans to fight for another 4 or 5 years. But, of course, that's always going to be taken into a different consideration if you start losing bigger fights and you just don't feel the same passion anymore. So we'll see what ends up happening with that. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. I have Canelo by that of unanimous decision. Wouldn't be surprised which way it either goes. Because right now, I give Jermell Charlo about a 30% chance to win this fight. Before, it probably would have been about a 10%. But we'll see what ends up happening. Anyways, that's pretty much about it. I have Canelo by unanimous decision. Let's see what happens. I think that is going to be a very interesting fight. As for Jermell Charlo, he's going to have to use his feet. He's going to have to establish distance the best that he can, work behind that jab, tie up Canelo Alvarez and frustrate him, work behind that left hook. Beware of Canelo Alvarez's right hand. He's going to throw that a lot. If you're Canelo Alvarez, watch out for that lead hand. Watch out for that left hook. You're going to have to get in there, and in my view, you're going to have to make this fight very, very ugly. And Jermell Charlo, even though he has great heart, and good mental toughness, in my view, he might be able to be broken in this fight because Canelo Alvarez, once again, he's very hard to hit even at his weakest. He has very good defense, and on top of that, he's a guy that has excellent power and great counter-punching ability. But the biggest question that I have about Canelo Alvarez is where's his stamina going to go? Because in the last few fights, his stamina has just not looked the same. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.